I'm Brandon Clark. This is my co-host Swall Hall, and today we're meeting on Uncommon Grounds. So we have a pretty good episode for you guys today. We have an author, a former officer, a professor coming on, a sociology PhD to discuss policing, crime, and everything that comes with it. So yeah, without stalling any further, without further ado, if you will, Peter Moskos is our guest of the day. He is a former officer. He's an author of multiple books. He is a sociology PhD. He teaches. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us. If you watch my show, you might have seen him on earlier interview.
Hey, thanks for having me back. It's great to be here.
Yeah. The pleasure is all ours. So I want to start with because talked a lot about policing and such last time, and I want to start with because regardless of what one person's opinion on the police may be, whether they're more anti or pro police, I think that everyone can agree that there is kind of a disconnect between maybe community trust and policing. I think body cams were kind of a huge first step with like transparency and kind of bridging that gap. I'm curious if you have any other solutions or if in your experience, if there were things you did that maybe personally helped bridge that gap, or how do you think we get to a place where people just generally trust cops? And obviously, I think there is general trust, but maybe the communities with less trust where we can kind of start bridging that gap.
I mean, I think I think there are sort of two different parts to it. One are people who deal with cops and others who don't, and are sort of judging how police act based on what they think other people believe, or like, or videos they see. Um, I mean, police. I actually think the crisis of police trust is overstated. The public, by and large, by huge margins, embraces the police and trusts the police, and also, especially among Black Americans, wants better policing. But even when I worked, and this was, mind you, 25 years ago, in East Baltimore, uh, I wouldn't say that. No, I was not universally loved as a cop, but there was still a lot of love out there for cops because, given the choice of, you know, being being a victim of a crime or seeing a cop around, most people always choose a cop. Now, no, it's not perfect. A lot of cops are young. A lot of cops are stupid. I actually think I was a better cop, and I mean in that sort of PR is not a great way to put it, but for shorthand, just in how you treat people and how they feel treated. I was a bit older. I was 20. I was 28 when I became a cop, if I'm doing my math right, and actually I was 29, but I waited tables for a long time before I was a cop, and I actually think that provided me great skills with um, being polite to people you may not like, and seeing your own attitude as a way to it was focused. It wasn't about me. It wasn't about my ego. It wasn't always about that person. It was about I'm trying to get something done here, and what's the best way to do that? And usually getting someone pissed off at you, even if they deserve it, but especially if they don't, often just isn't conducive to that goal. Whether that goal is having that person walk away or taking that person into custody, either way, rarely does being a dick help the job.
I'm curious, just quickly to follow up. Do you think more of the burden in doing this and fixing this lies with the police and maybe getting out there and trying to connect with the community, or do you think it lies more so in these communities with maybe getting past these preconceived notions or bias or whatever it may be that causes this?
Look, on each interaction, I'd say it's usually more so on the police officer. Now, there are some exceptions. There are people and groups that go out and harass cops trying to do their job, active, get in their face in the name of cop watch or whatever. And it's one thing to, if you have a certain amount of distance, if that's what you want to do with your free time, knock yourself out. I prefer to, I got many things I prefer to do. Uh, but I mean, they're out there, the sort of, and protests. You get the ACAB crowd or the Antifa crowd. But by and large, if you're just a cop answering the radio and going on calls, doing your job, yeah, it's on you. You're the person of authority. You're the one being paid to be there. You treat people hopefully with a certain amount of professionalism. Um, but again, I think it's a little bit the whole of a red herring in that if cops do their job effectively, I think the public will cut them so much slack, perhaps even too much to some extent. People want to feel safe, and that is more important actually than almost any other thing cops do. And if you're the one that called cops because other people are, destroying the hallway in your building or whatever, and cops are rude to you, I mean that's unfortunate, but it's people contain multitudes. They can both say, "Man, yeah, that why that cop treat me that way?" But I still need that kind of policing. And if the policing actually solves the problem, they'll go, "Well, all right, whatever." People got thick skin by and large.
Yeah, and I wanted to bounce off that. You said people want to feel safe. Obviously, a big contributor to that is lower crime rates. What would you say is the biggest root cause for crime today? Would you blame poverty, culture, family breakdown, or would you attribute it to something else?
I'm old fashioned in that I like to blame the individual. I like to blame criminals, and not actually take it back to the abstract.
Hmm.
Certainly, how you're raised matters. Certainly, the environment you're raised matters. Certainly, the culture that you grew up with matters. And it matters a lot. I mean, that's what determines who you are, but you still have a choice.
Hmm.
It may sometimes be a shitty choice, honestly. And some people, some people, yeah, some people don't have the choice to become a violent criminal. For others, you got to go, well, should I go out with hang out with those people or not? Um, so I don't mean to discount any of that, but in terms of preventing crime, those are distractions. We know, particularly as a Harvard and Princeton educated sociologist, it's really the root causes argument I push back against. That they say, oh, people, you hear this, and it's just not true. Oh, we can't police our way out of this problem. Well, it depends on the problem. Often we can, and if it's crime, almost always we can. And we have to focus on the so-called root causes: poverty, racism, unemployment, the bad family structure. Though the left tends to avoid family structure and culture, but we know we can, and those are off. Those are important.
Hmm.
Addressing poverty, arguably could be the most important thing we do, more important perhaps than crime prevention. But we know time and time again that the two aren't well correlated even. And when New York did reduce crime and cut murders, first by 50%, then another 50%. And it gets back to, the book Back from the Brink and the crime drop. Poverty in New York actually increased when that was going on. Giuliani was cutting social programs and social spending. And, politically, I think, those are not choices I would have made to cut those programs, but he did, and violence plummeted. We know we don't have to address root causes to address serious violent crime because it's part of what I get from teaching at John Jay. I mean, most of my students are not wealthy, to put it mildly. Most of them are not white. Um, Most of them have not had easy lives. And
Hmm.
there they are in college. And they know people, friends, families, sometimes siblings who made other choices. And it's the idea that, oh, well, because you grew up poor, that explains why you're mugging an old lady. Like, no, that doesn't explain it. And it's kind of insulting to everyone else, the vast majority of people who somehow avoid hurting others for no good reason. Um, but if we want to focus on crime, and I'm going to get even more narrow than crime. Like, if you want to focus on gun crime, then focus on gun crime. That involves illegal guns and the people who illegally use them. Don't overthink the stuff, um, because usually overthinking it doesn't work.
So that being said, then if I'm in an area, let's say what I consider to be a high crime rate, and as a concerned citizen, I want to do my part to try to get the crime rate to lower. Are you saying more policing is kind of the strategy that you would employ, or where would you sort of, if you were just giving advice to just a concerned citizen of what they can do or what can be done in their community?
Yeah, I would want to distinguish between more police and more policing. I mean, I'm generally think both are good, but cops are expensive.
Sure.
But policing as a verb is a very important part. I would prefer to have good leadership actually with cops out there, doing stuff, getting in people's business, getting in criminals' business. I mean, it's policing is and should be at some level. People don't like when I use the word aggressive, but I don't mean that in a negative way. But intrusive, active. Uh, and it's not easy to motivate cops to do that. So you need the political support because cops will, I guarantee you, do something wrong. And when they do, you need accountability and punishment. But I used to, I mean, I joke, but I'm not joking. Like, hell, when I was a cop, at least you had to mess up to get into trouble. Now you get cops who are getting in trouble who actually are not doing bad policing. It's just they're using force, for instance. Um, that's part of the job. And so that's where leadership matters, where someone just has to say, "Oh, I understand this is a viral internet video. Well, it's this is perfectly okay. Here's why. Here's what that person did." So that cop knows that they won't be thrown under the bus, quite frankly. But so yeah, you can have more police, you can have more policing, and it's not only done by police officers, but the idea that people, well, most people will behave themselves, but some won't. And what are you going to do with those people? And luckily, you don't have to lock them all up. Some have to, inevitably, some people have to be locked up, but quite few. But people can change their behavior because they know that that won't be tolerated. It, it's not that complicated. We've done it time and time again, and then we forget our lessons and kind of regress.
Oh yeah, yeah. Sorry, I don't know why I thought you had more there. I do kind of have two follow-ups to that. One is on you said a thing that I thought was interesting. You said that we don't have to address the root causes to bring down violent crime, and I would agree with you that we don't have to. I think that obviously more policing, less crime is going to happen. I would more my I guess question or pushback or however you would want to word it would be kind of on the should we, because I do think that there is, like, in my opinion, what I think drives crime is kind of a blend between desperation, opportunity, and then the absence of like fear. Like, kind of people do crime for thrills, and if they feel like they won't get in trouble for it, that's kind of a big driver. And I think policing kind of only addresses that one, which to me, I feel like if we're only addressing one of what I would consider three things, it keeps us in a cycle where we're always going to need police and more police or more policing as we get more people. Is that something you see as an issue, or do you think that policing would kind of address all of these things in the long run?
With good leadership, it could. I'm not. It doesn't. It automatically. I'm happy you mentioned thrills because people often forget that or don't want to admit that. A lot of crime is fun. You get an adrenaline rush, um, and that. I mean, yeah, that's an important part because crime prevention is problem solving, and some of that's figuring out why are people doing this. Um, I would say it's rarely desperation. Sometimes you might say the drug addict is desperate for money to get their next hit. You could categorize that as desperation, but it's addictions of maybe slightly different. But certain things like quality of life things, yeah, you can police them by making them not fun. That's that's an important part of it. Other things are trickier. It really, I mean, it does. People got to put on their thinking caps and figure out what crime we're trying to solve and why. I mean, the historical lessons to be learned, though, is like say with car theft. Why do people steal cars? For money and for fun. And I would say now more for joy. Well, I enjoy riding. That qualifies as fun, but you can get all three of them actually. And so arresting car thieves only goes so far. I think you do need to do that, and perhaps not release them immediately as we do now in New York. Because a night in jail can be a deterrent. Because you might go, oh, remember that time that we stole the car and then it didn't end up so good, as opposed to we stole the car, we got arrested, and now I'm home and the life of the party with a good story. But what the NYPD did back in '90s, when I mean, and car theft has gone down dramatically, and some of that is better design for cars. But they took down the whole criminal enterprise. It wasn't just about making an arrest. It was about, okay, where are these cars going? Oh, are they getting picked up and going to a chop shop? Are they being abandoned because it was just a joyride? Or stripped for parts? Well, if they're going to a chop shop, let's go investigate that chop shop. So it was looking at the whole sort of the whole pathway of crime, um, and trying to really just knock down those enterprises. Um, Ironically, gun violence is one of the easier things to police if you have the political will, because almost all guns used in crimes, certainly in a place like New York, are illegal. They're not legally possessed. Well, it's also there's huge racial disparities, and that's part of the problem with getting political support because it's vastly disproportionately black or Hispanic, like 95%. Um, if we don't want to deal with that, with the racial disparities in victimization and offending, that's a choice. I think not dealing with it is an immoral choice, but we could just deal with it and say, and we did this again in the 90s, as we just said, you can't carry an illegal gun. If we catch you, we're going to put you away. And even if it's not used in a crime, and fewer people started carrying guns, and then fewer people started getting shot. That was a big contributor to the violence decline in New York City. And remember, because I mean, most people weren't alive, I guess. Well, a lot of people were, but 1990 New York had 2,262 murders, and now it's around 300. I mean, and it's not just murder. I trust that statistic, but all the other crimes dropped in that same dramatic amount, and the benefits, the trauma that wasn't experienced, the trauma that wasn't transmitted through, both laterally and intergenerationally and all that. I mean, you can't have nice things if you don't feel safe. And I mean that, literally and metaphorically.
Yeah, and the other quick follow-up that I had was on, you said about leadership and kind of the viral shootings and being able to draw the line, and I'm gonna ask you maybe if you don't have one off top, that's fine, but do you have maybe an example? I think it could be helpful for painting the picture of what you mean, of maybe a shooting that you do think was too far, and then one you think is like maybe people it went viral for being too far, but you think maybe, hey, no, this is actually one that the cop should have stood on, and like to kind of draw that difference.
Boy, I know a lot of them. Bad shootings. I mean, they go back. Some I can't remember all the names. Philando Castillo, that was the one in Minnesota, right? I thought that was just a bad shooting. Um, it's interesting because Trayvon Martin wasn't killed by a cop, and somehow that became a police issue. Like, wait a second, again, if we're gonna at least yell at us for stuff we actually do. Who was the kid in the park in Cleveland on that winter day?
Oh, yeah, no, I know who you're
Amir
talking.
Rice.
Yeah, yep.
That one was bad policing, but I also want to say the guy pointed a gun, and if you do that, I mean, here's the basic thing: if you point a gun at a cop, I want the cops to shoot before they're shot, and the cops don't know if the gun is real or not. Don't be holding that gun, or unless if you are holding that gun, yeah, expect it. Very good chance you might be shot. Um, the kid in Chicago that ended up, you know, well, years later with the his name was Toledo. He shouldn't have been firing a gun at 1 a.m. or whenever it was on a school night, but instead the mayor basically said the problem was Scott spot shotter and cops chasing this kid with a gun. Like what? No. Um,
I'm sorry. I'm curious what you think of just like other attacks. I don't remember her name, and you might not have seen the shooting, but there was one that went viral a while ago, and it was a lady who I think she had like boiling water or something, and like tried to flip it at the officer. Do you think like do you kind of just draw the line at if you come at the officer, you're kind of going to get what's coming to you? Do you think it needs to be some level drawn on like
so let me, I so there are like three different. There's a third category. There's one, was it legal? Was it necessary? Would I have done it? Um, that can you defend it legally is actually pretty broad and gets cops off with a lot of questionable shootings. I don't like that one, but it is a split second decision. I think it was the wrong decision. I don't think it was criminal. Um, I don't like it though. Um, I don't like it at all. So then what do you do? And then you get in, then, you know, then you need better training. You need that threat perception. But I also don't want cops to get boiling water thrown on them. But I
Right.
don't quite understand at that moment how shooting stopped didn't actually stop that threat. So that's part of the reason I question it. But I have been in risky situations. I never fired my gun on duty, but that was probably because I was only on the street for a year, a little more than a year. Um, and it is those gray area ones. But strangely, those are. I mean, that I know the one you're talking about. Often, I'm baffled to me. Cops shoot and kill in America about 1,000 a year, and most of those are pretty clear cut. But it's interesting that how some gain traction, and recently in the past couple years they haven't. I think there was almost this once body cams became common. People were kind of amazed to see these videos. Um, and I don't know whether it's desensitized or people have moved on. Or, I suspect that some of the lack of attention given to police behavior recently is because of Israel and Palestine. Like there's a lot of overlap in the people who were protesting and complaining, and they moved on from policing for probably for better for the sake of policing. Um, but I hate going. I mean, I will like judge incident by incident and Monday morning quarterback because I feel like in a way that's my job to talk about these things. But it's not about the incident. I mean, if it's criminal, charge the cop. If it's really bad and it happens, more than once, fire the cop. Um, but man, and I always hate saying this, but it is a big country and shit happens. Um, I don't know, we're never going to stop it. So, for a while it was like every week here's another, and I go, this one's kind of okay, this one's not, and you have to take into account human reaction time. If we want to lessen the bad shootings, and you do that through elevating the profession, you do that through better training, you do that through good sergeants. That's the hard work. It's actually, it's not going to happen from a top outside in sort of reform. Seattle, Washington just got out of, I think, a 20-year consent decree. It was a long time. I could be off on the number, but, and um, however many years later, there were 1,400 cops. Now they're 900. The city's grown in population. The murder rate is like quadrupled. And somehow, that you check the boxes and you declared success. I don't know Seattle that well, but I refuse to believe that police department is better now with fewer people and more murders than it was back then. Um, it just, that's not the way to make things better, but it's hard to, I mean, I can say, oh, we need good leadership. Yeah. How do you get that? I don't know. Um, so it's not something you can just sort of clone or scale up necessarily, but it really does come down to that. Holding people within the organization accountable, having a certain amount of standards, but I, yeah, those aren't so easy to operationalize, and they require buy-in from the organization. It can't just be, we don't like you, therefore we're saying you must do this or can't do that. That rarely is a productive way to make things better.
So I don't remember if this is the same one that you were talking about, Brandon, but I remember seeing a clip about an older black woman in her home, and it seemed like she was having a sort of a mental episode, and she said like, "I rebuke you in the name of Christ," and was sort of acting like there was like a demon in the room or something, and came at the cop, and ended up getting shot. I don't remember if that was the same one with the
Yep.
boiling water, but kind of touching on that, do you think that Americans and America in general expects too much from the police? It kind of expecting them to be social workers, therapists, first responders, all of this combined into one job, or is that sort of the job?
I know it's kind of popular now to talk about, yeah, training other people to do different aspects of it. I, I, I lean towards, look, it's the job. We're already paying them. They are better. I mean, yes, I would prefer to have a proper paramedic treat me than a cop, but cops are trained in first aid, and some of them were paramedics before.
Sure.
They are, to a certain extent, jacks of all trade. And look, they're on the clock. We're paying them. We can't have a social worker and a paramedic and a clergy member at every, incident. And a social worker. So realistically, I think we're stuck with having cops handle these situations. And look, by and large, in the vast, vast majority of the time, but not all the time, they handle them pretty well. That said, social workers don't handle them all perfectly, and social workers get killed. Um, so, it depends on how much money you have, what you're willing to spend it on. But um, I think for a lot of these issues, and the mistake is focusing on the response. Who is best to respond to the situation, and that could be uh, someone having a psychotic episode. That could be a homeless person. Once we're responding to it, it's almost too late because then we're not talking about the actual root cause, which I avoided earlier, but I'll use it here. Then we're talking about whatever is the immediate danger or public quality of life issue.
Mhm.
And at that point, like we've already failed. It doesn't matter then who I mean, yeah, sometimes it does. But I'm going to say it doesn't matter who replies at that point. The person, why is that person having a psychotic episode? Where was the medication and treatment that would have prevented this? Why is the family unable to get help for someone they know and love who desperately needs help? I mean, I constantly hear that from people and students. You know, my brother, he's, we've tried to commit him. We've tried to get him help, but he doesn't. He says no. But we have to live with him, and he's dangerous.
Mhm.
So um, we need to front end that stuff more. And I don't see any trend that's sort of dealing with that mental health issue and a certain amount of involuntary commitment that is combined with some type of effective treatment that is way out of my lane. Now I don't know how to medical psychiatrist, but I mean, someone's got to, other countries manage this. Other countries that don't have
Right.
as much money as we do manage this. You don't have people ranting on the street and so on, or nearly as often, I should say. We could do better, and we don't.
Yeah, and as a follow up, I know this is maybe slightly out of your particular specialty, but how would you go about addressing some of those mental health crises that we've been seeing? Obviously, even with like the school shooting and um, the one that just happened recently with at the Catholic school and all of that, and just mental health in general seems to be sort of a big issue in our country. Is that sort of a policy issue? Does that start at home with the family? Kind of how would you approach solving that, or at least
I don't
alleviating it?
know, but I mean, as a human being, I can give my ideas, but I do feel a little
Yeah,
uh, away from my comfort zone here. But look,
sure.
it's part of it's just healthcare in general that is often inadequate. Um, but we do. I don't know of any other country that is so reluctant to help people in need of help who may not be cooperative patients. Um, I don't know how some combination of cajoling, of offering, you know, offering better carrots. But at some point, it is inhumane to have people, and I don't know what the answer is to to the mass shooting things, but I do think of people I see in New York City who are dying in front of our eyes on the street,
Hmm.
um, and we they refuse help. Well, that's not a choice they are making in a right state of mind, and it's not right for them. So we do need some form of expanded civil commitment, and we do need beds and treatment. Um, because I don't want that to just be about getting them off the street, though I do think that's a start because the streets are dangerous. Uh, so it's going to cost money, um, but yeah, we're just not there.
I wanted to ask you because you mentioned force earlier. I did want to ask you about like police brutality as an issue, and I don't mean like a singular issue. Obviously, I'm sure we all agree that any instance of actual brutality is a problem. I mean more so like, do you think we're seeing it as a rate that you would consider like systematically troublesome or otherwise deserving of concern? Do you think this is something that is blown out of proportion? And if you do think it's warning of concern, like what do you think drives it? Like why do you think this is such an issue if you do think it is
Yeah, I mean, brutality by definition is bad, because that's what we're defining it. Uh, I'm going to sound like a crusty old cop here, and say I actually think part of the problem is police are not using enough force, and that leads to needing to use more force. The idea of constant the people love saying you should de-escalate or create distance, both of which often are true. Um, but there's also the element that the longer something goes on, the more dangerous it is. Time is a variable, and it's danger times time is the or risk times time is the danger. Um, and I see these situations go on for far too long. Where in my days, you'd bum rush the guy and take him down and get him in cuffs, and no one would be seriously hurt. Um, we were good at that. And there was something, yeah, and there was, so the idea of constantly demanding voluntary compliance to someone who either has already shown they don't want to comply or they're in no mental state to. And then you get, the idea of, tasing people and so on. Sometimes you just, if this person needs to be in cuffs, just grab them and put them in cuffs. And if there are four of you, you're going to win that wrestling match. And it it still might not be pretty, but that's kind of. And let me give a sort of different example: crowd control situations. I don't know what happened to the old police baton, and I don't mean the little expandable ass, but the actual stick. Um, it was such a great tool. I never had to strike anybody with it, but I because people wouldn't mess with that. Now I see cops, basically get in a like slapping fest with protesters. There's no reason someone should be 6 inches away from a cop yelling at him or her. Um, you got to stay a bit away, but you can't do that if you don't have the right tools. Oh, but the batons, yeah, they can be abused like all tools, or they look too aggressive. But we haven't replaced it with anything. Um, Crowd control's become a lot tougher after 2020. Um, But here we are. So yeah, I want in a way like cops a little bit quicker to use force. Long story short, so that they don't have to resort to brutality so often. But those are separate issues because I think the brutal cops are going to be brutal no matter what, and they need to be called out um, and dealt with, which is kind of different
How
because
do you
that's a
think we start?
problem.
How do you think we start weeding those cops out where they
You
will
look at
exist?
people doing similar jobs in similar units, and wonder why this guy has 12 complaints and the other guy has two. You can't just look at complaints because people can complain, uh, just to harass you basically as a cop. I mean, if they know, it's on your record, even if it's unfounded. Um, and there's a maxim, which is unfortunately true, that if you don't work, you can't get in trouble. Um, and if the fifth complaint is going to trigger something and I got four, okay, I'm done working and you're still going to pay me. It's just now I'm not being a productive cop. So I mean, some cops are more active and are going to be in more situations, and they'll get more complaints. So you got to compare apples with apples.
Um,
Which is what I mean. It seems obvious, but they don't do that.
yeah,
There really is like you get five CCRB complaints in New York City, and I don't remember what that triggers, but it triggers something.
yeah.
Well, if you're working in headquarters, that trigger should be one because you're not dealing with the public. How did you get a complaint at all? And if you're out there, actively trying to get guns off shooters, yeah, maybe you get a few complaints. So that but again, it's within that same unit. Cops generally know who. Some of it you can be trained out of it because some of it's unintentional. Like I just don't know how to deal with this situation so well, either how to speak to someone or proper physical moves. But other times they're just they can be brutal people, and cops generally know who they are, but the system then has to be responsible to get them out of there, and no one no one likes to take that responsibility.
You can go ahead.
And yeah, bouncing off of kind of what you were saying there with the complaints and you'll just have a cop that's not actually doing their job. The stats that I've looked up are saying that police morale and recruitment are at sort of crisis levels. People aren't signing up to be cops. Anecdotally, in my life, I can maybe list like one guy I went to high school with that I know went on to join the academy. But are you do you think those stats are accurate? And if they are, how do we fix police morale and recruitment levels?
They're accurate for specific jurisdictions, often big cities. I just gave a talk a month ago at the Florida Sheriff's Association annual conference. Um, so these are elected. They're by and large conservative Republicans. Not all of them. There's some diversity, but I think there's 76 counties, and they said we're not having a recruitment problem at all. Um, we're hiring. We're poaching from New York. Come on down to Florida. No, no income tax, and we're not out to get you. So, I mean, that's kind of a shame. But I mean, shame. I say that as a New Yorker. Uh, but yeah, recruitment is a problem where the politicians turned against the police and not for good reasons. Um, and then I mean, look, if you're 21 years old now, I'm gonna say that the anti-policing ideology that came out of BLM from 2014. Um, that's your entire, not just adult life. That's from when you were 11 years old. You've been hearing again, depends on where you are in your environment. But you've been hearing that cops are bad, cops are racist. Um, why would you want to join a bad, racist, oppressive organization? And the people who don't like policing, I mean, this was a strategy. You know, they got rid of Paw Patrol because it was a positive portrayal of policing. They know that. Of course, positive portrayals of policing matters. You know, I grew up in the officer-friendly era. I'm sure that was paid for by some government program. The idea that cops are good and you should trust them. Those things matter. The interactions. A lot of people become cops because of some positive interaction as a kid, or because of some TV show or movie. Yeah. So it is that part a little bit is a PR battle. Um, and what's frustrating is that even if you really think policing is an evil institution, don't you still want it to be better and not worse?
Mhm.
I mean, you know, there are ways to make policing better, regardless of what one thinks of the institution. And the reformers don't want to do that. Good policing, I think, scares them more than bad policing does because it harms their greater cause of police and prison abolition and whatever other parts often go along with that.
Yeah, and I find it funny that you were saying, maybe not funny is maybe not the word, but talking about like ACAB and growing up hearing that. And I know you mentioned Trayvon Martin earlier, and that wasn't a police officer, but that's sort of, I always attribute in my conversations that as sort of a tipping point socially. It really seems like that was sort of the start of, I don't want to say wokeness in general, but it really feels like in me growing up that that was a big turning point socially. But yeah, all these people growing up in this environment not wanting to join, well, then who does that leave? The people who think that that is a bad organization, they obviously want nothing to do with it. Well, then who does that leave who does join? And it seems like that might contribute to getting bad apples who do just want to, maybe the over aggressive guy who does just want to become a cop because he wants to prey on people. Do you think that that kind of leaves the door open to invite less
Yeah,
desirable people to join? Or
yeah. I mean, standards are lowering. I mean, no doubt about it. And it's hard. It's hard to any individual who knows. NYPD recently lowered its educational standards. And as a professor, I have a vested interest in saying education is good, and I
yeah.
believe that. But I also know that in Baltimore, I worked with people who did not have any college because there was
Mhm.
no college requirement, and many of them were excellent cops, and many of them were smart people. But they came from backgrounds where getting a job was more important than going to college. So you still can recruit in different ways. It depends on the jurisdiction, of course, but from a New York centric position, I mean, it's a pretty well paying job. It's a pretty secure job. You get a pension. I mean, people 21-year-olds don't appreciate a pension, like how rare it is and what that really means. So it's kind of a shame. It'd be better for police recruitment if they got rid of the pension and just front loaded all that money. But it would then you'd have a lot of poor cops at the end of their lives. Um, and partly the recruitment issue does end up a bit of a battle. Like New York City's never going to pay as well as some places in New Jersey or the suburban counties on Long Island. Um, and yeah, in Florida, yeah. So but one department's hiring. So, uh, but to answer your question, yeah, I mean, we can pretend that lowering standards doesn't give us worse cops. Of course it does. Otherwise, we wouldn't have standards. And those problems may not come to, we may not see them for 10 or 20 years. But yeah, I mean, I don't know how specific you want me to. I don't know how much. I don't want to get
Say
too
whatever.
localized in New York City. I don't know where people if they care so much, but like NYPD hasn't had went 30 years without a major systemic corruption scandal, which is it used to be every 10 years we'd sort of joke there'd be a big scandal, but there were some scandals in the mid 90s that happened before but played out when Bill Bratton became commissioner, and then those were dealt with. Um, and then under Bratton and following him, the department basically stayed clean until Mayor Adams and his corruption at the top. But that idea of like it's really amazing that you can have it. I mean, look, cops get fired. There've been dirty cops. Uh, it's not, but it has been basically bad apples. You haven't gotten a systemic, here's a gang of five cops who, robbing people kind of corruption. And you haven't had it for 30 years now, and that's a huge accomplishment. And I'm afraid that lowering standards at some point, rolling the dice, maybe we're 10 years away from the next big one, maybe sooner.
Yeah, so the last question I had for you, and then maybe Swal, if he wants to ask you one more, he can get one in. It's just kind of broadly speaking to give you a chance. What's in your experience something in policing or with police stations, wherever, that you think that there should be more of the budget directed towards, like that could use more funding? And then what's something that you think maybe is funded too much? That, I mean, you could even think of it as like, what would you pull funding from to give more funding to, or something like that?
Within the police department,
Yeah, yeah, like both
I mean,
within.
there's almost no leeway. It's all labor. There's almost
Yeah.
nothing else left. You
Yeah.
get a little bit of training and some cars, but more than 90% of the budget is labor. So um, that's one of the weird things about policing, and it's why when defund happened in some places, it had such a bad effect because often that labor is non-negotiable because it's contractual.
Do you
Um,
think more funding should go towards things like training then?
yeah, training's expensive because of the labor involved because you're taking that cop off the street. Um, yeah, because you're either too often the training is box checking, like don't commit sexual harassment at the workplace. I mean, you don't have to be a cop to get that training, but they're checking a box and say we've done it. Actual training has to be more constant and involve, especially if it involves tactics. You got to train in that stuff. Every month, if not every week, some of it, but it comes at a huge cost to get that kind of because you're going to be doing it in service and so on. Um, I'm always trying to get cops out of cars. I had a crazy idea in the second edition of Cop in the Hood about giving cops the gas money that they don't burn if they're willing to walk around instead of driving around, and it would cost the police department nothing. Um, I still think it's a good idea, but no one's ever tried that one. But so there are some ways you could shift small bits, but in any labor-intensive organization, it's just going to salaries and benefits, and then that usually doesn't even include pensions. But yeah, there's not much to move around, unfortunately.
Yeah, and you can go ahead, Swap. Yeah.
Yeah, cops on horses. Let's get some more Mounties going.
Those are the easiest to cut, and yet everybody who has ever who has dealt with mounted police says they are such a useful tool when you need them. There is
Yeah,
no substitute for a police horse,
I'm
but
sure.
they're expensive as well. Like I would actually keep those mounted units. They're also
Yeah.
good for recruitment. They're good for the image of the police department. But things like that are the first to get cut when times get tough, and it's a shame because it is kind of what makes policing special. But if in a crowd control situation, nothing like a giant line of horses.
Yeah, so for my final question, and then if you guys are cool with it, I have one silly question that should be pretty short. But my final real question, kind of pivoting away from policing and talking about what happens after policing with prisons, do you think that the current approach is working? And how do we balance rehabilitation and punishment, just sort of from a sociological and sort of point of view?
Compared to countries we like to compare ourselves to, like I'm thinking Western European countries, we have
Mhm.
less policing and we have more prison. And I am going to say I think there's a cause and effect there. Um, Ideally, we have police and they deter crime, and people don't enter that system in the first place because they're not committing the acts that get them arrested and charged. Um, you know, Beccaria, I never know if it's Beccaria or Beccaria. Either of you guys speak Italian, but the he came up with deterrence theory and the idea that deterrence to be effective has to be swift, certain, and proportional. And arguably, we got none of that. Most people don't get caught. Trials take forever, and then sometimes the sentence length can seem very arbitrary. and long, depending on the crime. Uh, I mean, we've moved away from jailing people after arrest, and I worry about deterrence, losing deterrence there. I worry about the ability to people to snitch on others, to put it frankly, um, as a get out of jail free card. I don't know what rehabilitate. You hate to be against rehabilitation because it makes you sound like you're a pet down on life. I think people. Partly, I don't like the word because what are we rehabilitating them to? If you really did grow up in a fucked up environment and like, no, you need to be habilitated, not rehabilitated.
Sure.
And also, a lot of people just need help. Um, like, let's just call it help. I want to help you, so, and then hopefully you won't commit a crime. There's a certain paternalistic. I mean, it is rooted in religious paternalism of salvation in
Mhm.
rehabilitation that we do. I don't know. Again, maybe you like committing crime because it's fun. Then I just want to tell you not to do it anymore. But the recidivism levels are terrible in America, and that most people out of prison end up back in prison. Um, and the vast majority are arrested again. So it doesn't work. I kind of think we should be a little more honest with punishment, make it shorter, say, make it more consistent, and then try and help people. But it's hard to look. You can get like if the problem is addiction, yeah, sometimes you can get clean in prison. Some people, you know, find God or go back to school. There are lots of some people do improve their lives in prison, but by and large, most don't. And then when they get released, they go back to the same environment that sort of got them there in the first place. Except now, they have no job and have to rely on, it is a messed up system. But that's also why I do like to, I do like to focus on the policing part of it because it's why crime prevention is so important. Because
Mhm.
every part, yeah, every part down that criminal justice road is just so messed up. Um, and yet we can't do away with it either. So I don't know. The best
Mhm.
thing to do is to not have the person commit a crime in the first place. So let's help them.
Yeah. Um, for a silly one, just to end us off, I always wanted to ask. I know you said you were only on the street for about a year. How realistic are shows like NCIS, Cops? I don't know, in any of those
Well,
TV
I mean,
shows.
The Wire is the one
The Wire,
that
yeah.
was policed where I worked, and The Wire was very realistic,
Okay.
and kept me psychologically close to the streets of Baltimore from when I quit in 2001 to when I finished my dissertation in 2004. That's basically when it ran, and
Hmm.
so I appreciated The Wire and David Simon who created it. He's been good to me. He's a mensch. Um, Cops I liked before I was a cop, and then I no longer wanted to watch it when I was a cop for two reasons. One is when you're around people like the Jerry Springer set at work, like the last thing you want to do is watch them after work. Um, because it is in that sense. I mean, yes, it's sensationalized, but there was a realism too. Well, I'm thinking of Jerry Springer show, but Cops was similar in that the other problem with Cops was people were acting a little bit for the camera,
Hmm.
um, but it also cops are constantly messing up in that show because policing done right is boring. Um, it's when sometimes you can't control it, but it's when something goes wrong, and as a cop, you can say, like like Monday morning quarterback in the football coach, where you see you turn that way instead of that way, and you didn't make the tackle. Um, and so you see where the cop does something stupid. I don't even say stupid, but the cop makes a mistake, and you go, "Oh, geez, now it's on." So that's kind of frustrating. It's actually not very much good policing in cops.
Sure.
Another show that was a victim of the anti-policing pendulum swing of the past decade. Um, and then all the other shows are bullshit. I'm just gonna say that.
So you're telling me Criminal Minds isn't
Yeah, and the
isn't
rookie.
legitimate? Yeah,
Come
it's not.
on.
I don't know that. Okay, I don't know that one. I watched a bit of now you don't even people don't watch the same show. East New York, I think is called. It was a
Uh-huh.
some cop show, and I was on a plane, so I watched like 3 episodes, and it was kind of realistic. I mean, if it was a TV show, but it wasn't crazy. Except for I never realized in the middle of the second episode, oh, it's supposed to take place in like the 7-5 precinct in East New York, the cops don't have body cams. And I was like, oh, because nothing destroys plot conceits more than
Right.
actually having a body cam showing what happened at the
Yeah.
scene. So that's interesting. They just said, in our world, there are no body cams, and then we can
Yeah.
still, have police procedurals.
Yeah,
That's funny.
that's good to know. Yeah, well, I want to thank you again for taking the time
Absolutely.
joining us. I think it was a really good conversation, very insightful. We'd love to also have you back on here. There's always something
I
to talk
enjoy it.
about with police
Yeah,
and crime. So
anytime. I'm happy to be on.
awesome. Well, thank you again, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, my friend.
All right, you too.
So initial thoughts, what were your thoughts of the interview?
Um, yeah, I thought that was a great discussion. Very insightful to hear from somebody boots on the ground who's lived the reality of being a police. Um, and I know I read his bio and all of that, but I just expected it to be uh, since he's no longer a police officer, I thought he would be less pro cop than he was. And so I was pleasantly surprised to hear that. But yeah, with the rehabilitation and all of that, I wanted to touch on that because I, it, it, I think you need to focus on the entire picture and not just, okay, police, 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 arrest, arrest, arrest. Okay, cool. Then what happens? And so that's why I wanted to bring that up, just to kind of hear what his thoughts were. I know that, he's not a mental health professional or anything, but obviously studying sociology, I thought he might have some insights there. So,
Yeah, and I think he offers a unique perspective with the sociology PhD, and then also
mhm,
having been on the ground. And then for his
right,
book, he interviewed a bunch of cops. I agree with him on a lot of what he says about policing as a whole. I think
sure,
my biggest disagreement with him is he definitely thinks police should have a bigger role than I think that they should. Like I think that the root causes, matter more than
yeah.
he does seemingly. I think that we should address more of those. I'm curious, was there anything like you learned from him, or like, anything you really took away, or like a moment you're like, like glad I heard that one.
Yeah, I think it was interesting to hear about all the New York stuff, just because obviously I don't live there. I'm not from there, and so hearing about um, he talked about the crime rate dropping 50% and then another 50%, and just different strategies and stuff that they tried, and I thought it was insightful about the, the car robberies and stuff, and attacking that specific crime at multiple levels. Talking about the people who actually steal the cars, but then what do they do with it after? Okay, illegal body shops, selling that for parts, and where does that scheme, like, how much does it scale? And obviously, with like drugs and stuff, I think that's one of the ones that we're all mostly aware of the different levels because we've seen Narcos or Breaking Bad and stuff. But now I'm going to be thinking about other crimes and kind of what crimes are connected to those crimes and where can we sort of attack it at different points. That's it. That was an interesting viewpoint for me.
Yeah, and
How about you?
yeah, the biggest thing I think I took away was definitely his how I didn't think like you. Well, I don't know. I didn't think he was going to be as big on police solve everything. I think that was
Yeah.
like the big takeaway. He kind of, I think, a lot of in terms of the immediate effects cops can have. I think that was like the stuff that I took the most from him on, and like I do
Yeah.
think, or when I was younger, I mean, if you can't tell from some of my hangings here, when I was younger, I used to be a lot more anti-cop, and I've talked about this on my channel. I've had kind of an evolution where like I'm not so much anti-cop as like I just want good policing, which I think
Mhm.
is like where me and him are in sync. And I think a lot of the measures in which he talks about like, hey, leadership more so than just like a reactionary kind of response to like maybe these shootings or something, is like to call for like better leadership, to have like these kind of principles in order to dictate these things. That's kind of the biggest takeaway I had from him. I do want to say he did say that our shoot time works really well for him. So hopefully we could have him
Oh, cool.
back on, because we didn't get into I also want to ask him about prisons and stuff, because
Yeah, yeah,
I want to ask him about cashless bail. I figured me and
sure.
him would disagree there, and I wanted to get a officer's opinion. And I think it'd be cool to talk to like a cop who maybe firsthand is dealing with the people, and to get more of an opinion about the prison system as well.
Yeah, I'd love to have him back on. And I had like a couple pages of questions because I wasn't sure
Yeah.
You know, you're never sure how long the response will be and all that. So I had a bunch of stuff I didn't
So
ask.
did I, yeah.
But the other thing I thought was notable was when I had talked about cops kind of being a one size fits all, because you hear this a lot with these situations where why are cops going to here? We need, you know, a mental health specialist and blah 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 blah.
Mhm.
And him to say, well, look for a few things here. One, there's just not that type of money, dude. You can't have 5 different specialists out to every call. Like, and you might not even know before you get there, is this a mental health thing or is it a violent person, you know? And so, and then, you know, talking about the training too of it all, of him saying, like, look, it's all going to staffing. There is no training budget. There is no, like, a little bit
Shocking.
for cars, a little bit for, you know, guns and, you know, that stuff, but everything else is just, you
Yeah.
know, paying the guy 60K. And honestly, I just made that number up, but I I would think in my mind I could never be a cop because I what amount of money am I willing to take to maybe never come home to my family?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Crazy amount.
no
It'd make
amount
a
of
crazy.
money.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
No.
so like I don't even think, you know, defund the police. I don't think 60K, 70K. I don't know if that's enough, dude. Like obviously most of the time it's traffic stops, mundane shit, but like that one day where everything changes, like how much compensation. So that was interesting to touch on as well.
I agree. That's actually in terms of like how I've kind of evolved in my stance on police over time. That's I think one of the bigger changes I've had where I used to be a big proponent of like we need 2 tiers of like, you know, social workers who are unarmed and come to these emergencies, you know, first and things for mental health, which as someone who's worked in mental health, I mean it sounds like in theory great idea, right? Like
Sure.
cops often don't understand how to deal with these situations, but it's just like pragmatically, like he said, like you said, like the cost, it's just never going to happen in terms of like coordination between the two. It's just going
Yep.
to cause more problems. Social workers are going to end up getting shot and killed and things like that. So I
Mhm.
think for me, it comes a lot more into training. Like we should just be training cops to better fill these roles if we're going to expect them to, which is why, like you said, it was shocking to me when he said like, yeah, over 90% of the budget is like not training related. Like I was like, hey, like, do you think that's a problem? You know, like
Yeah.
I had to ask him.
Yeah, yeah, that was insane to me. And yeah, it goes to show when we say these slogans a lot of time as young people, we don't know what we're talking about, you know? Defund the police. What do you mean by that? Because as you know, taking his word for it, obviously we're not looking at the budgets or whatever. Um, okay, so you just want to pay the guy with the gun 30K a year instead? That's what you want? That's what defunding would be in this scenario, as he's kind of pointed out. So yeah, be careful what slogan you attach yourself to because it might sound good on the surface, but do your research and make sure you actually know what you're supporting. Is I guess big takeaway.
Yeah, I mean, as the, you know, the lefty in me is the need to defund the police. What I supported with defund the police was the idea of stopping the militarization of the police, things like Cop City or, you know, giving them like armored tanks and stuff like that.
Sure.
Which that I'm all for. I don't think the
Yeah.
budget should be increased to give, you know, cops any
No training.
but yeah, training is what, yeah.
And I don't think that that's that controversial to
No.
say, "Hey, let's train the cops better." I don't think. I think that's a hopefully both sides
Yeah.
agreement. But
I totally
yeah,
agree. And it's something I've spoke about on the left. I think that's why the slogan itself of defund the police was always like the biggest enemy to the movement itself, because
yeah,
it's like what we want is more trained officers. Like to just say defund the police is a bit insane. And like most
yes.
people aren't going to take from that defund the militarization of the police, which I also get then having that as like a slogan isn't as like
It doesn't
sexy or
fit on the
whatever.
bumper sticker as well.
Exactly. So it's like that's like the battle, but yeah, no, I always think semantically it was a losing slogan. But you know, I do support, as you can tell, I do support the demilitarization of the police, that's for sure.
Sure.
So yeah,
Yeah.
final thoughts real quick and then we'll wrap. What
Yeah.
biggest takeaway
No,
or
I mean, interviews are dope. Talking to people with different perspectives is dope. Learning things is dope. I think we agree. Obviously, if you're, I don't know what situation ever calls for the police to have a tank. I can't really imagine
yeah.
that because why do we have the National Guard at that point?
Mm.
But for the most part, I think you and I have a lot of agreement in this issue. One thing I didn't bring up, but I was looking for a question or a response to kind of bring it up. During the summer of Black Lives Matter, something that I noticed, I went to a protest. I've said that many times. I'm not afraid to say that as a conservative, not because I was supporting the actual organization, Black Lives Matter, but because I supported the movement and what it stood for. And so I went down to the local one around my town. But something that I noticed just during that summer is I got pulled over one time for speeding, and it was a white cop, and he was coming up, and my heart was, I mean, it was pounding, it was racing, and it had never really done that on a traffic stop before. I mean, I'm not going to dox myself, but you know what county I live in. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
not a lot of like stuff is going down here, so I'm not really like stressed about stuff like that
Yeah.
usually. But at the time, just because tensions were so high, I was nervous, and then I started thinking maybe he's nervous because of everything that's going on,
Yeah.
and now we're both nervous, and that's not the energy that we need to be having at this traffic stop, because that's what's going to make something occur. And so I wanted to touch on sort of that mental game, I guess, of they're on edge, we're on edge, so then they're more on edge and we're on edge. I didn't end up touching on that, but that's something that I think needs to be brought up in these discussions is how much are we just like psyching ourselves out mentally and causing bigger problems?
Yeah, my final thoughts, I kind of agree with that. That's kind of why I wanted to start with asking about bridging the gap with community trust, because I think
Yeah.
that causes a lot of problems in that, you know, just and not trusting the police, you could be more nervous. The police could take that as suspicious. It just
Mhm.
leads to more downstream effects. But yeah, no, I love doing the interviews. We want to get more. I want to get more people to be able to come on here. The problem is always, I feel like just doing it on a Sunday. Most people are like Monday through Friday people, but as we can get more people, he seems to be always down to come on. So if like any big crime stories, maybe now we have our police officer correspondent to bring on the show. But yeah, I think it went really well. Love conversations like that. So we'll look forward to have more. For those of you who enjoyed the conversation, let us know your thoughts in the comments. Let us know what you thought the best moments were, where you agree with them, where you disagree with them. Just so you know, anywhere that you're watching, leave us a like. Make sure you subscribe. We're on Spotify. We're on Substack. We're on YouTube. We're all over. We're here every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And until next time, peace.